So hello everyone, thank you for joining, and I'll dive straight into it. I'm trying to carry out this session on qualitative research. I'll be talking about today why we do qualitative research, a little bit about how to make qualitative research robust, different methods we can use, and about analyzing and reporting the qualitative research. But first of all, since we have so many people around here and so much experience around the room, I just wanted to get a sense from all of you about why do you think we carry out qualitative research? Or like, I'm sure a lot of you have carried out qualitative research yourselves. And I wanted to get an idea about why you have done so, or why did you use qualitative research?
Yes, please use the chat box for uh, responding to Sadia so we can see that.
I can see some replies coming up. Someone's mentioned to get a wider perspective besides the numbers, to get insights from the audience, gather opinions, feelings, understand how and why change happened. Talked about deeper insights necessary to design, why questions, get more triangulation. Yep, that's a lot of good answers, a lot of interesting things coming out. Yes. More nuance and findings and have insights from the findings. Exactly. Not everything is measured by numbers. Sometimes numbers are very boring. Yeah, no, quite a lot of good answers we have. So similar to this, yes, to triangulate, that's also good. That's true. We use that to triangulate a lot. So this is sort of essentially, this is the reason why we actually do qualitative research. So some of the reasons why we do it is first, we want to do it to understand the context we are working in. So whenever you design a new program or you're starting off a new program or you're thinking of doing the inception phase of a program, these are the times when you need qualitative research because then you need to understand the context. You need to know who's involved, who is there, what do they do. Sometimes people will be playing more than one role. So may have retailers who are selling stuff, but they're also providing credit. So they have a financing role. Or you may have cases where things differ because of seasons or times. And so this level of detail to know the context, to understand what things look like, that is one of the reasons why we may be using qualitative research. So at the very beginning, when we are thinking of designing a program or when we are designing the program, that's when we needed to understand the context and the background of what we are going to work on. A second time when qualitative research becomes important is when we want to design activities, interventions, or when we want to decide what we are going to do. And in this case, qualitative research is useful because we want to think more deeply about what is possible to implement. You may need to know a bit more about the skills that people have. You may need to know whether they need to hire more people or different kinds of skills. You may want to know a bit more about what is the financial capacity of people, what reputation do they have, if they give out certain information, will they be trusted, or will people say that no, this guy doesn't. These people always don't give us the right information, so we won't believe what they say. These are important details and nuances which you can get through qualitative research, and this is where, when you're designing the activities and interventions, you need qualitative research to give you this information. And also when you want to assess what the project has achieved, because you've done the understanding the context, you've understood the
Sorry, Sadia, you've frozen again. Let me try to reach out to her.
And because things change,
Uh, sorry, Sadia, we lost you there in the middle.
my back.
Yeah. You were just getting to the third point.
Okay. Cool. Yep. Okay. Sorry about that. My internet is coming on and on. So the other time when we want to use qualitative research is after we've designed our activities, planned our interventions, and everything is worked out. Then we want to see whether the intervention has achieved uh, its aims.
Sadia, the slides are
In
not
that
up right now.
case, right. In that case, what we need is then we need to see whether these interventions have, whether the activities that we have planned have actually resulted or made the changes we were expecting. Just because we think that if we do certain things or we train so many people, everyone will react to the training or change their behavior, it may not happen that way. And we will want to understand why. So, to understand why, to see why things worked or did not work, and or why plans did not work out as we expected, that's when we need qualitative research, because qualitative research will then help us to sort of dig a bit deeper into what has happened, why, and where. So that is also another area to why we need qualitative research. Okay, so now we shared a case study with you. So I wanted to show the same case study in the screen, which will then help us to talk about our next question. So maybe I can give you just about 2 minutes to look at the case study and think about and understand what it says, and give it so that we can sort of, if you've already read the case study, that's great, that's brilliant. And for those of us who want to take a look at it, here it is.
I've dropped a link for the case study in case somebody wants to access it offline. So that's also in the chat.
Just give me a minute. Sorry about that. Yeah. So to quickly sort of also summarize from the slide, as you can see, the case study. We are talking about a program called BizDev. They're an SME development program. They partnered with Easy, a local cook stove manufacturer. So BizDev wants to improve the availability, affordability, and quality of cook stoves produced and distributed by Cookeasy because they think that will increase household savings. Cookeasy has said that their cook stoves do increase fire savings, that it also improves health benefits. Uh, the program believes that women will benefit from the improved cook stoves because they will be the primary users. So if they're the primary users, they will be less exposed to fumes during cooking. And because it increases savings within the households, the savings made in from household expenditure will remain with the women.
Yeah.
BizDev also
Sorry,
said,
Sadia, your slides are not up again.
oh,
But you were just reading the case study, right? So I've shared that
yeah,
link.
I was just reading the case study, that's true. Sorry about that.
Good.
Are they up now?
Yes, they're up now.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I was actually just reading through the case study. So we talked about how the program thinks that it will be women who are benefited because they're not exposed to fumes during cooking, and the amount of fumes are drastically decreased. There's more savings from more less using less charcoals, and if household expenses are there's savings from household expenses, then women will be the one who keep that savings, so they would have the money. And BizDev decided to work with Cookeasy stoves by improving their quality, increasing their production, and improving the financial and managerial systems of the company, plus helping them with marketing and distribution of the cook stoves. Now, Cookeasy thought that men are the one who make the primary expenditure decisions on household finances. So if there are any major expenditures to make in households, then it's men who decide. So they centered their promotion on places where men would frequent, like marketplaces. They would distribute flyers in the markets, or they would have local promoters who go around and then target buyers in the marketplaces or in shops or near the market. And this led to a significant increase in sales. They went from 1,200 before the partnership to around 1,800 after the partnership. You can see this data also reflected in the next slide, which shows some information that the program got after running their intervention. So the first thing is the sales information, as you can see, the before and after sales. You can see the increase in sales. The program also found that 6 out of the 10 participants, so they call people who were involved or were reached by the program with the information, they call them participants. So 6 out of these 10 participants were benefited by the project. So what I would like to know from you is, say you are looking at this program from the outside, you come and hear the story, you know what the program's doing, and you've heard about what Cookeasy is selling and what the benefits are, and this is the information you get. What questions come to your mind, or what more would you like to know from this program? What questions do you get after seeing this kind of data? Right? How did they benefit? That's a very good one. Exactly. What does benefit entail? Basically, when you say benefit, what does it mean? Is it women that are benefiting, right? How were the savings used? Who exactly bought them, right? Exactly. What did made us successful? And is there a difference or commonalities between those who benefited and did not? Positive impact, what is driving impact? Was employment created? Is there a health benefit? That's a very good one because we haven't talked about health yet. We just said benefit. What are the main stakeholders? Is it really the men who buy the product? Exactly. That's a very insightful question. Who are the question factors involved before and after? I mean, how long after? It's good. That's true. Is this increase in sales even? Is this something to be noteworthy? Or would this have happened anyway? Why do some not benefit? What is the carbon dioxide? Yes, CO2 savings. Yep, that's a very important one. Any negative unintended effects? Use of time saving. Exactly. Yes. Exactly. If the financial decisions are made by men, then where does it help women? Can we expect similar findings in different regions? What are the factors contributed? Pretty good. Those are very good answers. And in fact, when I thought of it, when we looked at this case study, we had this kind of questions, pretty similar to what you have thought. We talked about, and we sort of categorized them into different areas about awareness and perception, about behavior, predict usage impact. But it was about the same thing, that how do you perceive, what is the benefit of it? How did you hear about it? Or how often do you use the cook stove? How does it benefit you? How has it impacted your daily life or your daily routine? We talked about who makes the decisions about purchasing, what influence your purchase decision. So all of the same questions that we have, and a lot of these are similar from what you've suggested. So these are the types of questions that you would think about when you see a program like that. Just the numbers themselves are not good enough or not sufficient to tell you the whole story. And there are sort of lots of things that come up in our mind whenever we see just numbers. And this is just a reflection of when we use only numbers to tell the story. This is a reflection of how much we miss or how much detail we would like to get and how many things come in our mind, but that we don't know about. So, leading to our next question, then, say you want to get all that information that you've talked about, all the questions that you've brought up, and you want this data to be credible, believable. And you want that for two different reasons. Basically, one is you want when you report the data, that it should be believed by by the donors, by your funders, or even by others who want to see your program. You also want to be able to make decisions. And for that, you need reliable data, something that you know is true, or you can believe that this is correct. So then I can act upon it. To get reliable, robust data, do you always need to do a survey, or is survey the best method to get robust and reliable data? What do you think? What do you think that if you have to get reliable information for the questions you have asked, do you need to do a survey? Is the only way to get reliable data, is survey the only or the best way? Answers there. Of course, a lot of us saying no, not entirely. Surveys only when we want to generalize for large population. There are places where we think that survey is important if we want to generalize. Depending on population, or you could give accurate or even better tertiary data. So let me move on to the answer quickly. So basically, our question is, since we're talking about qualitative, and a lot of you have said, what we want to understand is survey the best response or the best way to do it? Or if we need a lot of data from qualitative, how can we make qualitative research robust or credible? And we can do that through triangulation. So by meticulously and carefully triangulating qualitative research, that helps us make qualitative research robust. And what is triangulation first? Triangulation is when you take data and then you match it from one person to the other. You get data from different people, different types of people. You get data from different locations. And then you talk to people from different places, from the people near the town or far away, and you get data from different research methods. By getting these different things and different aspects embedded into your qualitative research, you can use triangulation to make your qualitative research robust. Because as you analyze data from these different sources, different methods that you use, and you triangulate between them, that is, you compare between these data, you can then get a robust picture, which you can share with others, and you can also feel confident that the data you have is credible. So what do we mean when we say using different methods or locations or persons? So for example, persons would be you talk to different kinds of people. Like in the case of Cook Easy, you would talk to men who have bought the cook stoves. You talk to women who have bought the cook stoves or used the cook stoves. You talk to people who have not used it. You would talk to salespeople who are selling the cook stoves. So these different kinds of people will give you a picture about how the sales of cook stoves work, what people ask about, what people like about them. And when you talk to people, you should not talk to only the ones that are easiest to reach. You will try to talk to people who are also difficult to reach or farther away, or they don't live right next to the store. You may snowball, so you can ask one respondent to give you a suggestion of someone else who has done a cook stove. You can ask them to give you a suggestion of someone who lives far away that have used a cook stove. So this way you can then snowball and let one respondent lead you to the next person. And you would spend time with the respondents so that you can go back to them if necessary, so that you can go back and ask them if necessary about details that you may have missed the first time you talked. Because when you're doing qualitative research, because of its fluid nature, you may anyway always miss some things. And hence it's best if you have the option of going back. When we say location, we mean that different locations so that you bring a little bit of variety so that you can also incorporate into your research the things that you know may cause a difference in the impact, even though it's the same product. So for example, being near a town and being far from a town may have an impact on whether people use cook stoves or how they use it and what they see the benefits being. You may pick locations based on, say, market days or religious days. You might find that cook stove sales are happening on market days, so that's a good time to go and you can see whether the people are interested in it, or it might be because religious days have an impact. If you're working on a project that works on farming, it might be the dry areas or hilly areas. Hilly lands versus flat lands have an impact on how the project impacts the people or how the project plans its activities. So by incorporating the variations that come because of location, then you can also capture what is generally happening in different places. Then, and this is what we will focus on a lot more in the next few slides, is you also vary your methods. You use observation so that you can see what is done. You know what to ask or how to ask so that you can get a sense and see what things are. Observation is mainly to give you a visual idea. You can use focus group discussions so that you get an understanding of what everyone thinks and does and what they don't know or what they agree about. You may do an in-depth interview, which is where you can sit with one person, probe with them and understand the details and the numbers. So by triangulating between these things, by triangulating between all the different persons that you meet, by triangulating between information between the different locations that you go to, by triangulating information between the different methods that you use. You can then build a comprehensive picture, which is then what contributes to making your qualitative research robust. So I'll summarize now what we've discussed so far. So qualitative research is basically you want to find the devil in the details, because the devil is always in the details. Whether your intervention is well designed or not depends on how much detail you have thought about and how much detail you have gone to with the information you have. Whether the intervention has worked and whether you know what has worked or has not worked and why things have worked. If you know why it has worked, you can plan that into your next steps so that you can improve the quality of what you're doing. So you will look at the details from all different perspectives, from the different people and the locations and angles. Qualitative research helps us to be precise. We know what causes what, but we also know how much that impacts, that how much of X will cause how much of Y. And we will know if the measurement systems we have are the right ones. Like we can see what different measurement people have, land sizes, bags, weights, and so on. These will all be different in different locations, and we can incorporate that understanding into our assessment of what is happening or why, to what extent people change. And while you do this, if your methods or your questions are not giving you the full picture, you feel you're missing something, and or you still have questions, then you have the flexibility in qualitative research to change them. And that's one of the great things about qualitative research. It gives you an enormous amount of flexibility. So that mid-research, if you think this is not working, you can change your method, you can change your process, you can change your locations, and you can get new information that will tell you what is working and what's not. And when is it robust? It's when you start hearing the same kinds of things and you don't see new information. It's at that point you know, okay, I've captured all there is to know about this aspect, and you don't have to continue doing the research. So this is a frequent question when people ask, how do I know when I've got enough information or when I have data? So say, for example, you're asking about awareness of the cook stoves. And when you ask people, how did you learn about it? What do you remember about hearing about it? And you go from one place to another, or one respondent to another, or one buyer to another, and you talk to them. And you get, first you hear about the flyers. Someone else tells you that I was in the market and I saw someone came and approached me and talked to me about it. Someone else talks about radio. And then someone else then talks about how his friend told him. And then you go to the next person and they say, oh, my friend told me. And then another person talks about radio again. Once you start seeing you're getting the same information, you now have a full picture of how awareness has happened, what has triggered awareness. At that point, then you can say that, okay, I have a full picture, and then I don't need new additional information. That's when you can say that the research is robust. So this is helpful for us to decide a stopping point when we can say, okay, we have got enough information. You can feel confident that the information you have tells you the full story. Okay, I think now we'll move on to the next section, which is where we talk about the methods. We'll talk about three major methods: observation, focus group discussions, and in-depth interviews that are used in qualitative research. I'll talk about how these methods may have been used in the Cook-Easy case. And I'll also be asking you about your own experiences with these methods. What have you seen? What are the challenges? What are the recommendations or suggestions you would give so that we can all also learn from each other and understand what are the other perspectives that have come up? Okay. So diving right in, straight into observations. In the case of Cook Easy, I'll use that as an example to explain, then we'll go to the steps of how to prepare. The project first wanted to see how the cook stoves were made, because remember they said they would help with improving the production process, increasing production volumes. And the first step of that was understanding how production was happening. The first thing then they did is they decided, okay, when we go to, we want to see the production, we will first go to a cook stove factory and see how they are made. To do that, we want to see what supplies they use. We want to see how the supplies are stored. We want to see where the supplies are kept, how much inventory they usually keep. Then we will walk across the factory to see the different steps of the production from the raw materials to the final product, all the steps that are involved, and we will go through it in the sequence that it is produced. And while they're doing this walk across for the observation in the factory, they also decided to ask someone in the factory, like someone who worked there or a supervisor, to sort of walk and explain things to them. So often we think that observation means just sitting there and watching, but it's not that. You can talk to people. You can ask them what is happening so that they give you an idea about how things go. And so the steps to prepare for an observation are what the program did. They made a list of things they wanted to see, such as raw material, supply, inventory, storage, production steps, and then how they send the products out. They choose a walking route, which is they decided to follow the workflow within the factory. In agriculture projects, or if you're working in rural areas, a similar thing is done, which is called a transact walk, where people will select a village and say, okay, I'm going to walk across from outside to the center, or I'm going to walk from the east to the west end, or I'm going to walk from the road to the riverside. So you select a flow or a walking route that covers what is useful for you, that covers what you want to see. So, and this has to be done carefully so that you see the sequence and steps and the important things that is useful for your information. Then you can talk to people. You ask them what is happening or what is being used or how things vary between seasons or during months or whether things are different during the daytime or in the evenings. This information will then help you get a full picture of what is happening. I would like to ask, have any one of you ever used observation as a research tool? Like, what are the challenges you faced, or what are the pitfalls or negative aspects that you see? So, have any of you used observation, and what are the challenges you have faced in using observation? That's again an observer effect. Yes. Would not be representative for observe other equations. That's true. Observers, as an observer, you're seeing only one thing. And because observations benefactors changing their behavior when they see new people coming in. Subjective, difficult to measure, and all variables need to be measured. Exactly. That's a key problem you'll see in all qualitative research, that sometimes they're not appropriate for all kinds of variables. So you will have to pick and choose. It's a very good challenge. So all of these challenges that you mentioned, they're absolutely right. This is exactly what are the problems with observation. This is why using observation as a research method is a issue. Not knowing the subject of the study, right? Exactly. So A few tips I would give in trying to address or reduce the effect that you're seeing. And yes, take note that may not be possible to completely do away with any of these effects. So some tips you could, or some things that may help to reduce the impact of all these challenges or to at least mitigate them to some extent is you should avoid bias. Whenever you're going out to see something in the field, whether it's your partner, whether it's your own work as a program, whether you're a funder and you are going to see what people are going to do, you should always try to avoid bias by not selecting the best factory, the best farm, best shop. To do this, like you may want to ask for a list of places and say, these are the ones I go to, or you may ask them to incorporate a bit of variety. For example, if it's a partner, you can tell them that since we want to improve your production process, it's important that I see good and bad as well. So if you can show me both. So these are the different ways you can try to avoid bias as much as possible so that you can avoid the best factory or the best situation. The second one is the avoiding the Hawthorne effect. So this is something you all brought up as the observer effect or people changing their behavior because you're watching them. So it came from a research that was done by someone called Hawthorne in a factory in Illinois. They saw that they tried to see what would be the effect of changing the lighting on productivity. And what they found was where the lighting was improved, productivity increased. Productivity also increased in the places where there was no change in the lighting. The reason was basically because people knew they were being watched and they wanted to do things better to show that they were very good. And that's where productivity increased automatically, just because they were being observed. And this is sort of a problem that you face as an observer. Now, to reduce that, one of the things you can try and do is try not to draw attention to yourself. Large groups, important people, and so on. This is almost if you could go somewhere with a large entourage, you come with a big car and you drive across the village, that will draw attention to yourself. Rather than being the observer, you will become the observer. So this is where you should to try and draw as little attention to yourself as possible. If it's possible, also try and go often, spend more time in those places until people see you and they think, oh, this guy comes to visit all quite frequently. He comes every month or every 2 months, and then you blend in, and that can reduce the observer effect. So then you can have people just going about the business and not bother. If it's a busy market day and you sort of blend in, the way you dress looks like everyone else, the way you stand there looks like everyone else, you may be able to also blend in as well so that you do not affect how people behave. Select the right time to visit. So if you like when they went to the factory to look at how cook stoves were being made, absolute wrong idea would be going at lunch break. So of course they will bring the workers back to show you, but it will be contrived. It won't be natural and you won't see the process as it is. So try to select a time when you know things will be normal. If you know that everyone in the village takes a nap in the afternoon, don't go for a transact work in the afternoon. Go in the mornings or in the evenings when you know people will be around so that it will give you a full picture of what you want to see. Do not interrupt people too much. So often the way to do this is you can ask someone in the village or someone in the factory, just one person to walk around with you rather than stopping everyone in the way and saying that, okay, can you explain what you're doing or why are you doing this? If you have this one other person who is local, who is explaining things to you, then it will be easier to not interrupt other people and you can just go about watching and learning about what's happening. And finally, as you watch, make sure to take notes. Photos and videos can also be feed into your evidence base. So that's really important to be able to have things that show or illustrate what you're saying. And so keeping that and having a few notes can remind you of the details of what you've seen. We'll now move to the next one, which is FGDs. Again, now I'll talk about the case itself. As we have seen, some of the information that we have from the case. Yes, you should ask for permission before photos. Yes, sorry, I should have mentioned that. Talk to people and make sure if they're not comfortable doing taking photos, do it. It's also important. For the focus group discussions. So in the focus group discussions, say for example, in this case that we talked about, the program wanted to do an FGD to talk about what is the impact they're getting. They decided to do focus group discussions for men and women. To start with, what they did is they thought about what are the questions they wanted to ask. And you've seen some of the questions in the first few slides we had, where we talked about awareness, product usage, how do people use the products, what do they use them for, what times do they use them. We talked about how people are impacted by the projects. And we talked about how people benefit from them. So these are the check. This is the checklist of the behavior changes or the ways people are perceive the product. We made a checklist of these things. Then we thought about who we wanted to talk to. Thought it would be good to talk to men and women. We try to keep groups small so that we can talk to everyone in the group. So usually in an FGD, you try to keep respondents between 5 to 15 people. The larger the number, the more difficult, the less it is to get into the details. So try and keep it closer to 5 to 10, but not more than 50. You get people who are similar to the topic. So you get women who have used cook stoves versus women who have not used cook stoves being in different groups so that you can get similarities among them. The respondents were invited the day before and asked to be available at a certain place and time, asked if they could. We invited a bit more than we expected to come so that just in case somebody couldn't show up, we had enough people for the FGD. In a focus group discussion, we always have two people. There's someone who's facilitator who manages the discussion and a second person who was taking notes. This is important because the facilitator has to make sure to get everyone to participate. You ask a question and then you ask, okay, you thought so, what about you? And then, but you seem to disagree. You don't seem to think this is right. So this constant observation, maintaining eye contact, maintaining the flow of conversation requires you to be active, and doing that and taking notes at the same time is not possible. You can't say, hang on, let me write that down and then I'll come back to you again. So that would interrupt the flow. So that's why it's important to always have a facilitator and a note take. And always important to try and get participation of everyone. Sometimes you can, if you're not sure, repeat a reply as a question so that you can ask for more information. So say, for example, you say, how did you learn about it? Oh, I heard about it from my neighbor. Well, like, you heard about it from your neighbor. What did she tell you? Or why does your neighbor know? So these replies then give you areas to probe further so that you can learn more about what is happening and you can learn where information is, how the information flow works. Okay. Now, again, asking for you is what are the what do you think people should do? What other things do you think people should do to improve the quality of an FG? From your own ideas, from your own experience, what else do you think people can do to improve the responses they get in MFG? You're seeing a challenge that sometimes participants do not reveal all information. If you're talking about the competitor, that's a very important problem that can happen. Chance of people influencing the response or people taking over the conversation so that nobody else gets to speak. Yes, making it more conversational. Don't follow a script. Putting respondents at seats. Yes, that's a very good one. It's very important that people feel comfortable. So then you can talk to them. I separate men and women in terms of the focus group. For this case, they did. You can also, you may have a case where you do not separate them, but that depends on the context and the type of information you're getting. Do not ask suggestive questions. Yes, never give a leading question. Listening more than bringing own ideas. Yes, correct. Set a ground rule. Engage to different participants. Cut politely if they're deviating from the topic or talking too much. Yes. Give tasks to the most domineering member. Yes, sometimes you may have a very domineering person. Okay. So yeah, how do you handle some of these challenges, or how do you work around this? These practical tips are also things that I have seen or my experience. First is trying to keep the checklist short. It's very tempting to go out there and say, I'm going to get all the information I want. There's so many things I need to know. But in a focus group discussion, you need to keep your checklist manageable. So have no more than 4 or 5 things you want to follow up. You can have a lot of probing question behind each thing, but try and keep the checklist manageable and short so that people can talk a lot, so that you give people space to discuss things. Using local words and terminologies can make people comfortable almost immediately. They feel respected. It's an icebreaker as you're trying to learn the local words and terminologies from them. They feel like, okay, if you are using the local words and terminologies, then they understand what you're saying. So it feels as if they're comfortably chatting with you. It's not an interview process, or it's not like they're in the spot for some reason. So that can help. Sessions, keep the sessions short, less than 2 hours at least. Don't try not to take it beyond 2 hours. When people are sitting together comfortably, do not expect people to stop working. So you don't walk into a place and say, oh, then this market or this factory, can we have 5 people together and have an FGD? That doesn't work. So then you don't have people who are comfortable and have time to sit and talk to you. So get time from them, get them to sit down comfortably in a location where they're comfortable, have some snacks or drinks and so on. Make it a chatty place. That way you can get a lot more information. Respondents should not feel uncomfortable in each other's presence. So for example, if you want to talk to factory workers, then don't bring their boss into the same FGD. It may not be a good combination. And it was for this kind of reason that when we are talking about the easy cook stoves, we did not bring the men and the women into the same FGD, because we wanted to know whether women perceive the cook stoves differently from men. We wanted to know if women's sources of information were different from men. And this was easier to explore when you had them in 2 different groups. So you should have respondents who are comfortable with each other in each other's presence. And if while you're doing the FGD, contradicting views emerge, then encourage more discussion. Try and see why there's a contradiction. Try and see why people don't agree with each other. Because you're not trying to get a consensus, but you're trying to understand why these contradicting views are there. So that will mean also something. If you do get a consensus, then that's great. But if you don't, it also means something. It shows why people think differently and what is the behind their thinking, and whether there is a reason for different types of people to think differently. So it gives you something to explore. Someone has mentioned to consider age group. Yes, if you're talking about youth and children and older people, then yes, you would want to consider age group as well. So these are important points. So different things you can do to make in a FGD a free-flowing discussion where people share their thoughts, their beliefs, and their personal opinions about things. Okay, we'll move to the next method, which is in-depth interviews. Now, in this case, in-depth interviews were used mainly to speak with a few men and women to collect information about how they use the cook stove in their households. how many hours, when, what time, how they got the charcoal to use in the cook stoves. In-depth interviews were also used to talk to salespeople who were selling the cook stove so that we could probe more about their interactions with customers. So, as you can see, the selection of the individuals for in-depth interviews was purposeful. Like we knew who we wanted to, but we tried to also reflect the variety in the population. So, for example, when we talk to salespeople, we talk to people who had larger shops, small shops, medium shops, not just one type, so that we can get a variety from that group. We talked to people who had bought one or two, and we talked to people who had bought only or talked about cook stoves, but were and had bought it one for their home. So this kind of variety then helps us to get information. Yeah. When you're doing in-depth interviews, keep your respondent number. Anything between 3 and 30 can be an in-depth interview. It's the probing that gives you the detail, not the number of not the sample size. But once you go above 30, then you're doing a survey very much, because then the number of respondents is so many, the data you're getting is so huge, it can be more unwieldy to manage. So when you try to meet a large number of people, then it's better to plan a survey rather than planning only just in-depth interviews. You have to spend time with your respondents, take 1 to 2.5 hours sometimes. So because you have the time to probe and ask more detailed questions, you can have an in-depth interview for a long time. In-depth interviews are best for open-ended questions. So you ask people to explain what they think, why they think it, whether the different situations would change their beliefs or their actions. So you would say, okay, if the price went up, what would you do? If the price went down, what would you do? If it was available in different color, what would you do? So this kind of things then help you to understand a bit more in depth about what people's preferences are. So what the other thing about an open-ended question is you can also revise it. You can add questions, you can delete questions or change questions as you get more insight and information from what is happening. And before you go for an in-depth interview, it's best if you also get some information or background understanding of how things work. So, for example, it's important to know whether the cook stoves we are selling require a basic amount of charcoal all the time. Does it always have to be half full, or can you only have it fully? Does it always, or can you also just put 1 or 2 charcoals there and work on it? Or things about what times do people use the cook stove most? This background information, if you know it already, it can help you in developing a questionnaire. It can help you in probing more. So don't expect people to explain everything to you. People can only explain so much. So knowing a little bit about the process, about the steps, about the challenges helps you understand and ask questions better. And if you have close-ended questions, so close-ended questions are, you can ask them during an in-depth interview, but it's sort of like a waste of your time. It's better to ask close-ended questions in a survey. So things like, how satisfied are you on a scale of 1 to 5? Or are you satisfied, yes or no? Or how many cook stoves have you bought? These are questions that you sure can collect from a quantitative research. So best to use the close-ended questions. If you're going to do a survey later, or if I've done a survey before, keep the close-ended questions for the survey. And use the in-depth interviews as a way to probe and get more detail. Now, we had a number of questions, like when we when we first introduced the case, you all spoke about some different questions that you would like to know more about. Things like, how do people benefit? Or things like, how do people benefit? Or is it the women who benefit? Who bought the cook stoves? How is the savings used? So these are the questions you said that you had in your mind when you saw the survey results. Now, from your thoughts, if you had to, what, how would you collect this information? What methods would you use, or what would you the best way for collecting that information? Or more specifically, what are the ideas that or information that you think would be best if you collected it from an in-depth interview? Has the information changed your life? Yes, you want to collect and probe on those details. This is it's a personal thing which you cannot get from a group discussion. You can only get it by talking to someone directly. The how and the why, yes, exactly. Because how do people change their behavior? What behaviors do they have to change? Details and personal views, feelings, opinions, behavioral change. Yes. Okay. So probing is very important for in-depth interviews. And so the reason why so to help in probing, some of the things I do is first start with the structure of the question. I try to then say, first I'll talk about understanding their behavior, then I'll talk about their thoughts, why they think so, why they don't think so, or why they have this kind of behavior. What are their attitudes and preferences? Then I go into the numbers. So having this structure helps me lay out what I want to probe about. Then I try to build rapport with the person. I start with simple questions where to build your understanding. Start with we try to do not interrupt the flow of the speaker because as people talk, they may say, "This is what I do, and this is why, and this it saves me this much money." But they have not talked about their preferences. Do not stop them and say, "Hang on, can you tell me about your preference first?" Let them flow, let them talk, and then you keep notes, and then you can come back and check the data as you collect it to see that you have covered everything you have in your structure. And finally, try to revisit if you can, if you need to. Go back to the person later if you need to confirm something. So in-depth interviews, when you find a respondent who is really good, then you can go back to them later. So that helps you to talk to them and then see if they have additional information or if they can give you something that you've missed. So this method is best, and I'm sharing this so if you're talking about sensitive questions and you want to understand something in detail, then the best method to use is in-depth interviews because then you can probe a bit more. It's more personal, so it gives you more area to talk about. If you're talking about general practices, belief, or you want to confirm things you found from in-depth interview with a large group of people, that's when you can use focus group discussions. And observations are helpful when you want to get an initial understanding of things, or when you want to see something, which is like how cook stoves were made. It's easier to understand and see that from seeing it being made in a factory than asking for a description. So in those kind of cases, you might want to use observation as a way to get. So the method that is best depends on what kind of information you want to collect and what you want to do. Do you want to collect general practice and beliefs, or do you want to confirm? Then you would go for FGD. Or if it's more in depth, say a sensitive question or in detail about a person, then you do an in depth interview, observations for where it's easier to see. Okay. Planning and doing qualitative research takes quite a bit of time. So first thing you would want to do is collect background information on the people, on the different locations there are, so that you can decide on the methods, the location, and the people you want to talk to. So that helps you to plan your triangulation from the beginning. Select the methods, whether it's an observation, an FGD, or an in-depth interview. Is it a combination of them? Which combination? Do you want to do both observation and FGD, or observation and in-depth interviews? Select those methods. Decide who will be part of the sample, what kind of people you'll talk to, or where you will go. Make checklists for each case, whether it's an observation or an in-depth interview. You will always have a checklist of these are the things I want to know. And then think of timing. When do you want to go? What is a good time to go and find those respondents, talk to them, and get information from them? And then in the middle of your in-depth qualitative research, always keep like maybe half a day or one day where you look across your data, think, and then review so that you have time to see where the gaps are. And then you can use those gaps to say, okay, my next few interviews or my next few activities, this is what I'm going to focus on so that you do not miss it. So by building up your information from one method to the next, one person to the next, one location to the next, that's how you build in the robustness of your data and make sure that you get all the information or all the variety of information that's up there. By updating your checklist and questionnaire, you can make sure that you're not missing anything. You can change your plan. The thinking time lets you think about whether you need to change your plan. And always keep calculators, notebooks, translators, FGD facilitators, all of that so that you're prepared in the field. You're ready to get the information and analyze it on the spot to understand what it takes. You can also, in terms of thinking time, you can also say, okay, after I do my first interview, I'm going to take half an hour to sit back and look at the data and analyze it and then decide what I'm going to do next. So this way of following the flexibility of qualitative research that you have is its greatest strength. And that's what helps you make sure that you get the variety of research and data you need. I'm going to move now from that straight into analyzing. Here we want to talk about, I'll go from this straight into analyzing qualitative research. Here, I think in the case study, you have seen this. In the second page, there are some excerpts from the research that was done on cook stoves. So those research responses have already been categorized. The research it was collected from FGDs and in-depth interviews, and we've already said that this is information financial savings, or this is information on time savings. Or you can also say that this is information on the awareness. So we have categorized the responses already. So once you do your qualitative research from different methods and different people, start categorizing your response to saying that, okay, these are the responses that fall under this topic. Code the responses. You can decide, okay, this is where people are most satisfied. This is the least satisfied. This is the best top reason that they have. So this coding process is what you can do when you take your qualitative research. And you have to actually read through all the research or all the responses you have to do this process, to then code and categorize. You may need to convert the information into a uniform unit because people will talk in different units. And you can also cross-reference the replies. So as an example, I will talk about the information from financial savings from using cook stoves. You'll see this in the case study in the research excerpts. So the first one is on financial savings. And these are examples of some of the research information that we have got. No. So the first one is the money. Sorry, I have few people saying hi. I'm sorry to stop for a minute, but yeah. So the first respondent talks about the money I gave to my wife to manage the household hasn't changed, although I know she spends less on charcoal. Second person talked about with ordinary cook stoves, we use $1,000 worth of charcoal a day, but now only $500 worth of oil. So we have is enough for our families. Another person talked about that if you use a bag, we used to use a bag that lasted 2 to 3 weeks, now lasts 2 months. Another person talked about that she gets less cash now than before because they need less cash for buying charcoal. And last year they got about $250. Before they used to get $250 for every fortnight, but now they get around $180 to $150 every fortnight for expenses. So look at the information you're getting. Firstly, the first person, he talks about money he gives to his wife that that hasn't changed, although she spends less on charcoal, which then supports the theory that the program had that if there is a saving from using cook stoves, the woman still keeps that safe. But when you look at the last response, where she says she gets a little bit of less cash, we now know that although there's a saving in the household and the household uses less money for charcoals, it doesn't necessarily go to the women in this case. So you can see that there's a variety of. Now, this could be a reason why all the participants don't benefit. So it gives you an idea about why things are different. So it's cross-referencing the responses from person to person that gives you an idea about what happens. And then look at the units when we talk about, like the second response talks about $1,000 per day versus $500 per day for our family. So you know he's talking about more than one family. And so you would like to know how many families and how big those families are. But it gives you a dollar value of how much savings they're making. And you can convert that into a number of dollars saved per family. But the second or third response, where we said a bag used to last 2 to 3 weeks, now lasts 2 months, you will see that the women now, you will to convert that into money, you would need to know what size of bag, how much that bag costs. So if she uses one bag for 2 weeks, now she uses one bag for 2 months. That means this is how much money she's saving. So you will have to do this calculation to convert it into a unit that then you can say savings is about this much. Or in the third case where they talk about $250 before, but now they get 180 to 150. The difference also depends on what the man has, which means that it's not all of this difference is not because they're saving on charcoal. Sometimes it's also a difference because the guy does not have enough money to give her that. So maybe you would be conservative and say that, okay, let's assume that 180 is the best. The difference between 180 or 250 is the best. Or you may ask that how much of this difference comes from your saving charcoal. So this level of detail and the probing is what will help you then come to a uniform unit of measurement telling you how much is saved. The other thing I'd like you to note here is you see, it's the way people explain their household savings is so different that it's difficult to put this into a question where you can ask in a quantitative survey. You could ask them, how much do you save on charcoal? But the way they have explained it here in a quantitative, people don't keep notes of how much they save or how much they spent on charcoal before versus before, how much they spend. They can tell you how many bags have gone down or how many bags they used to buy last month versus this month. And you will have to do this calculation yourself. So in some cases, sometimes information is easier to get from qualitative research just because people explain things in a different way than what you are used to. So this is an example of how you can use qualitative research and how you can analyze from it. You would then convert the dollar values, all the different quantitative amounts into dollar values so that you can say this is the savings. You can say that how people save and don't save. Now I would like you to I would like you to look at the research excerpt for time savings. I'll show it also in the next slide so that you can take a look at it and say, what do you think of it? How do you, would you analyze that that information? What are your conclusions from? So like I've explained here how to convert the dollar values into the different quantitative information into dollar values. So here, what would you do in case of time saving? So let's look.
I've put the link to the document again. It's on page 2, the research excerpt.
Great. You can also see the time saving in the slide here. So for example, one person said that before we used to wake up like around 3 a.m. to get things ready for the children. But now we can leave the cook stove on low heat with a saucepan of water, and in the morning about what is ready to go. On probing about timing, she said that, okay, like before I would leave the stove on when I go to sleep at 1 a.m. and by 6 a.m. there's enough hot water for that. Whereas before she would get up at 3 a.m. to start heating water. Another person talked about how they would wake up at 5 a.m., but with the cook stove now they can wake up at 7. Men who talked about that before a woman would need to take like maybe 30 minutes to light the fire or to add fuel to the fire at night. So she would wake up after some maybe 3 or 4 times to do so. But with the cook stove, she just puts one lot of oil and then she can sit back and relax and can rest through the night. So what is your confusion? How would you convert this into time savings for the women? Someone said 2 to 3 hours time saved. Would you say that's for everyone, or would it be from one response? How does it work? Right? You can average from the responses. So exactly, that's how you would then do it. You would convert it to into hours per person, per respondent, and then say how many hours, and then you can average from them. That would be a way. You could code for different responses. You can put a range saying 1 hour is so many people, 2 hours, so many people. So that can also give you a way to give a frequency distribution. Could be. Exactly. So family sizes are important here. So you would, when you reflect that, you would talk about people with children or with this size of family. This is what it looks like. So that information could also come in. You can also use that to convert that when you have families with children and without children, how much time is saved for each and every person. Yeah, no, very good responses here. I think it's exactly. And by collecting this, we are not even being able to just describe what the mental load or burden, unpaid care burden is, but we can also just saying that, oh, go and save 2 hours a day is one thing. But when you are able to also back that up by saying that they used to wake up at 3 a.m., now they are able to wake up at 6 a.m. Or rather than 5 a.m., they went 7 and the day starts, or they don't have to wake up 3 or 4 times. This actually brings the picture vivid into people's minds so they can see what it means. So by using qualitative research, you can not only just give a quantified amount of the time, you can also describe what it means so that it feels, so someone can picture it and see what it means. Okay. We'll go to the next slide where we talk about reporting. So reporting on qualitative research, when you report on qualitative research, the number of things to focus on is first, you would start by describing the research methods you've used, what different types of method. I've done in-depth interviews, I've done FGDs, or I've done observations, and you would explain all of them. You talk about how many respondents you've interacted with, how many people were each available at each FGD total, how many people were available through your interviews. You talk about the different locations you go to, but also describe why those locations are different. We went to city centers and villages. We went to places close to the market and places far from the market. So that then explains what kind of variety and you're capturing in your information. You would describe the characteristics of investments, like large traders versus small traders and medium traders, or you'd say shopkeepers and so on. So this way, then you can then talk about how rich the data is, how many different areas the data covers. And this helps you describe that you have triangle. So it establishes that the triangulation of the data has happened and hence establishes the robustness of the data. Um, Make sure that you present replies to all your questions. So if you're talking about awareness and impact and behavior, make sure you present the replies that are specific to that. Give numbers and be specific, like you're saying 2 hours per day, you're talking about this many dollars per month saved, and decide a conclusion. Like in the research, you will find that, okay, this much has been saved, but what does that mean? What does it, what are the recommendations you would have based on that? That is also part of the information that you can be able to get out from your qualitative research. And explaining that or putting that plainly out would be interesting and important for the reader. And of course, keeping the writing style simple and clear. So, for example, if we want to talk about determining a conclusion, if you look at The third part of the research excerpt, which is where we talk about awareness and adoption of cook stoves. If you look at the research excerpt that has been shared with you, there's some information on awareness and adoption of cook stoves. And I don't have that on a slide, so if you could just look at it from your from the document that has been shared with you. But mainly it talks about firstly that Cook Easy's local promotion staff. They said that men come to purchase cook stoves on their own, but this is less common. It's not very common that a man would come and sell. Most of the time you'll see a man and woman together come to buy a cook stove, but then the men would pay. So they think that's where it's the men who decide to pay. The promotion staff will tell you. And sometimes they also get women who come to buy the cook stove themselves. Another information was many women were unaware of the benefits and affordability, and they had simply not heard about the new and improved cook stoves, despite all the promotion, the flyers, and the promoters that are there in the market. Another woman explained how her husband was resistant to buying a cook stove. So she decided to buy one, and now he sees the benefits and sees that it's economical. Now he's convinced, but it was she who had to take the step to buy it. Some few women also talk about how they bought the cook stove after hearing about it by accumulating small savings from their household expenses. So they saved up a little bit of money small by small, and then they were able to buy a cook stove themselves. So on awareness adoption, what drove adoption? What would be your conclusion, or what would be your suggestion to the program, or to even to Cook Easy? They need to raise awareness programs, probably do a bit more of them. That's exactly it. Enlarge marketing campaign to women, because it seems that women are more easily convinced and see the benefits. Awareness is driven by evidence, exactly. A lot of women did not see it. They do not know what the benefits are, so they have to see it. Also, the men, like the husband being resistant to buying a cook stove, but decided to buy it now, but is now convinced after he sees it's more economical. So being able to see it can be helpful, and it may be useful to talk to people who have already bought the cook stove to sort of help them create awareness on the benefits, provide financial products to help women acquire the products, exactly, because some, as you can see, it was not men alone who were buying it. So these are examples of some of the conclusions that you can get when you analyze the qualitative research. Women are the users and so need to be targeted. Economic benefits work better with men. That's a very insightful thing. So these are the types of things. When I say determine a conclusion, these are the types of things that that is expected from a qualitative research. It should give you information to improve the impact. It should give you information to improve your next steps. And by collecting this information and talking to it, you now have an idea of what convinces who. Women are convinced by this, or women do not know about this, that it's not enough to just target men because they are not convinced or interested. That even though the marketing happened in the marketplaces, the women did not know about. So these things are important, and this is some insight that comes. And so when I say determine a conclusion, these are the types of things that you can say. So a conclusion from this research would then be that women are not aware of it. The targeting campaign needs to reach with campaign, or the promotion campaign needs to reach women. It's good to use people who have evidence of changes to sell the story, to talk about what are the benefits, and that can help grow the sales of Cook Easy Cook stoves. So these suggestions are what would then be useful in terms of talking about what the results of the intervention are, but also what can be done to improve the results. What can be done to improve cohesive sales? I think I'm almost done with the presentation. We have a few minutes now for any other additional questions and answers. So, yeah.
Thank you, Sadia. We can send you the copy of the slides. I'll also share the recording of this session in an email. Yes, there's a question about coding, Sadia, which also came in before. So maybe if you could just talk a little bit about that.
So when I talk about coding, what you need to do is, because qualitative information is all about it's a bit varied, it's a bit all over the place. So when you read through the information, you will have to say that, okay, questions around awareness, these are the top three things that are mentioned. And then you would say, you may tally what are the what people say about awareness. Like, this is how I became aware, maybe. And then you can tally the results. So that's one way of coding. Coding would also then be about when you take information and say this is most satisfied, this reflects that they're least satisfied. So coding is when you take the as a responses you get, and then you sort of say give a number to it, or to find a way to do a frequency calculation around it, or you find a way to put them on a Likert scale and say that this is most, this is least, and so on. So it will depend on the information you get, and then you can code it accordingly based on what are the responses you get. Face-to-face versus phone interviews. I think phone interviews work well if you can talk to someone and set a time with them. Make sure that they're ready for the phone interview. Don't just call up and start the interview immediately. That helps. Phone interviews generally have to be short. Unfortunately, you have only 20 to 30 minutes, so you will have to focus very carefully on your questions. But still, the same things about probing, building a rapport with your respondent is useful and important. If you can do that, then within 20, 30 minutes, you can get a lot of insights and a lot of information about why are things like this? What do you prefer? What would you like? So that kind of information can easily come.
I was going to say the other sort of, I mean, obviously one of the advantages of phone interviews is it's much cheaper than a face-to-face with all the costs associated with it. But then the risk that you would have is things like what Sadia, you also mentioned, because we can't really have like clear idea of the metrics that people would use when responding for answers. So if somebody says that we have 3 bags of something as compared to 2 bags, what is the size of the bags, how much do they fill those bags? So sometimes in face-to-face, you're asking questions and observing. So there's always that level of accuracy that you get from face-to-face. So I feel like personally, phone-based interview methods are useful if you're very clear on the information that you need. But as a first step, still, if it's possible, the preference would be for face-to-face. And that's just my opinion, but
So yeah, I mean, phone-based interviews are all the rage now, especially after COVID. It became very important. So there are ways to work around it. You just have to be aware of what the challenges are. Someone asked about if you cannot access the field, that is when you use a phone interview. But this is also like when you're in the field and you find someone is very clear explaining and very patient with you, and they can explain things and very articulate. It would be a good idea to tell them that, please, I'd like to call you up later if I have other questions. I'd like to know your number. And that way you can follow up with them even without going to the field again. So always keep your eye out for those kind of respondents so that you can, even if you cannot physically access them, you can talk to them later to get information. Commissioners of research and evaluations react conclusions based on qualitative research, critical reactions and concerns. So this is where I've talked about a bit about the triangulation. It's important to establish the triangulation Establish that you've talked to different people, been to different locations. Explain why those different locations are different and why it's important for them to be different. Why did you go to somewhere near the town and somewhere far away from the town? So establishing credibility on qualitative research talks about how you have covered all the bases. So if you can give that, then you can reasonably assume that some level of belief and credibility is taken from your research. Survey will not give you the rich depth of information. So being able to provide that depth also establishes why the qualitative method was best and was helpful in showing what is the information you need. Is there any specific criteria for measuring sample size of people we should interview? As I've suggested, 3 to 30, so that you can, it's a manageable interview. It's not a quantitative survey, but for quantitative survey, you may have different methods of selecting certain sample sizes, and that's when you will want to go for some bigger sample sizes.
We've run out of time, Sadia, so I'll just have you take the last question. That's okay.
Okay, qualitative scale and depth of input. Course it can, I think it's quite information. It can be quite insightful into the scale and depth of impact, definitely about the depth of impact. Yep, I think here we are. Philippe, and over to you.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. I will have a follow-up email in which I will share the recording of this session. Feel free to respond to that with feedback. We have one more session planned on the 10th of June, which is on measuring wider changes in the system. So we look forward to having most of you participate for that as well. With that, we'll call this to a close. Thank you so much, Sadia, for your session. Thank you, Rana Rafiq, for supporting us with addressing the chat. Thanks.